Welcome to the Living the Fit Life podcast, episode 63. I'm your host, Chad Mueller, and today I get to sit down and talk nutrition with Cara Kasdorf. Cara, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Good, thank you. Yes, I know you have had a number of conversations with some of the LP community, more on the endurance side, I guess.
Yeah.
And this podcast, I guess our community on the podcast is beyond just the community locally, obviously. But I always love to talk nutrition. We've had a few nutrition topics in the past few years. So super excited to kind of dig deep into the kind of nutrition, what your thoughts are on nutrition, how you feel like it plays a role with our sleep and energy and overall health. And, the four pillars that we keep talking about at the Living the Fit Life podcast. So super excited.
Yeah, me too.
Awesome. Um, so yeah, I guess let's just jump in. Maybe you can give a little bit of background about yourself, how you got to where you are now, and sort of where your passion for nutrition came from.
Yeah, for sure. So I am a registered dietitian and sport nutritionist. I'm a co-owner of a company called Blueprint Nutrition. So we're based in Waterloo, but we do work with athletes and clients across Canada. I've been a dietitian for a number of years. I think it's something like 16 years now. So it's been a while. But I guess my interest in nutrition first came from I was a high school athlete, very interested in I was a runner, so very interested kind of in endurance sports. And just really noticing that connection between nutrition and how we perform and how we feel. And that was always something that was very apparent and interesting to me. So I decided to study nutrition in university. So I'm actually from Winnipeg originally. So I went to the University of Manitoba to do my undergrad degree in human nutritional sciences. And then I moved here to Guelph to do my master's degree at the University of Guelph. And did my internship to become a dietitian. So yeah, that was kind of my journey towards becoming a dietitian. But
Mm-hmm.
I decided to specialize in sport nutrition because I did have that interest as an athlete myself. And during the traditional undergraduate degree and master's degree, we don't get a lot of training in sport nutrition specifically. So I realized very quickly after running my first marathon in university that nutrition plays a critical role.
Mm-hmm.
And it is almost, it's a whole area of nutrition that's very specialized and actually very different from a lot of the things we were learning in school, which was more related to nutrition for different disease states and that sort of thing. So I did a lot of extra professional development and studied the area of sport nutrition. I had a lot of great mentors that were sport nutritionists, and that kind of helped me develop my skills earlier on in my career. And so I've always had a private practice in the area of sport nutrition, and it's something I really enjoy and something I really feel passionate about. And working with athletes that are motivated and excited about what they're doing is always super fun and something that I really enjoy.
No, that's great. And so, how long have you been part of the sort of the endurance community yourself? You said since university.
Yes, yeah. So I've been a runner for, I mean, as long as I can remember, pretty much. But yeah, I ran my first marathon when I was in my early 20s, and it was a complete disaster. I did not fuel properly. As I said, I didn't have a huge knowledge in sport nutrition when I first started studying nutrition. But then since then, I've run, many marathons and done Boston Marathon and Chicago Marathon and some of those bigger marathons.
Wow.
So I've been part of that community, both in Winnipeg when I lived there and then here in Southern Ontario as well. So it's been great to be an athlete myself. So kind of understanding from that personal standpoint what it can take to do all the training and kind of the toll it takes on the body, but then also professionally kind of understanding the science behind it and, kind of what the recommendations are and how to kind of fuse those two together because we
Mm-hmm.
know, sometimes what we should be doing is one thing, but then actually implementing it is a completely different thing, right? So
Sure.
it's good to kind of understand kind of that practical application of the guidelines.
Yeah. No, that's great. And like, would you? would you say that there's a big difference between endurance athletes and sports nutrition versus like a professional hockey player and how they approach sports nutrition,
Yeah,
or any
yeah.
other sort of high level sport?
Yeah, there are definitely differences, and so in my practice, I do work with a lot of endurance athletes, just because nutrition is such a huge piece of what we do. But I do also work with other sports as well. So you mentioned hockey, so I work with a lot of like OHL players. I've worked with an NHL player as well, and so in terms of what we do with the sport nutrition is going to be different, right, depending on the
Mm-hmm.
goals. And so even for some of the kind of corporate athletes, that's going to look different than an endurance athlete, because we're using different fuel systems. We're maybe have different goals in terms of increasing muscle mass or increasing strength or speed, or whatever that might be. And then looking at which nutrients we need to prioritize, and also looking at, so kind of that the macronutrients, carbs, proteins, and fats will look different. Nutrient timing will look different. How we fuel workouts will look different. And then if we, look at kind of a supplement protocol, then that will look different as well. So it is quite, um, you know, kind of the basic principles are going to be similar, but there are lots of variations in terms of how we actually implement that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned corporate athletes, and we're going to definitely jump into that topic. But I wanted to just ask, like, when we talk about performance nutrition and sport nutrition, when it comes to high level athletes, their careers are a sort of an aspect of their life, right? Like, it's usually younger. You're younger. You're at your peak. Would you also say that sport nutrition, performance nutrition, however you label it, can be sort of an approach to sort of just nutrition throughout your life? Or would you say you sort of have to switch that off and sort of pivot a little bit to a more balanced, maybe a bit more of a easier or less regimented nutrition?
Yeah. I really like the term performance nutrition, because it applies to your performance in your sport, but also just performance in life. Right? And I think
Mm,
that's always the important thing, is like your sport or your workouts, that's one aspect of your life. And if you're kind of not an elite athlete, but maybe just a regular person,
mm,
working out or training for a marathon or triathlon or whatever, you still have work and family and other interests and all of these things. And so if you're not able to perform in those aspects of your life, then there's going to be a huge problem, right? And so, yeah, I think, nutrition will look different for someone who's like, an elite athlete. Like when I was working with the NHL player getting ready for training camp, like obviously, like there's a lot riding on that, right? Like that's
yeah,
their
of course.
career,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
versus someone who is going to the gym 4 or 5 days a week. That's going to look completely different. But in both cases, the approach to fueling, I think, is actually similar, because I think it's, we want to have something, we want to have a nutrition plan that's realistic and sustainable, and that doesn't feel like you're always going on a diet and off a diet, right? You want it to
Mm-hmm.
be
Mm-hmm.
part of your life, and you want it to work with your life. So whether that's you're a high level elite athlete, or whether you're, kind of just going to the gym, not just going to them, but you're going to the gym several times a week and doing your thing, you need to find strategies to make your nutrition plan work for your life. Otherwise, it's not going to work in the long term.
No, it makes sense. That makes sense. And yeah, like, so obviously we want to talk about sort of what we label as the corporate athlete or the weekend warrior,
Mm-hmm.
working out 3 to 5 times a week for about an hour a day. They're living a fairly active lifestyle. They're trying to balance fitness and nutrition and work and families and
Mm-hmm.
activities and all this sort of stuff. But like, it is one of the things we talk about a lot and we hear about in community. I think just in society, you know, it's a struggle to balance all those things, especially as we, for some reason, keep getting busier and busier. And oftentimes nutrition is the hot topic that sort of takes a big hit, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that's one of the areas that it would be really interesting to get your take on. And so maybe right off the bat, like, what is sort of one of the biggest mistakes or sort of challenges that you see sort of most people making with their nutrition in
Mm-hmm.
that context?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's a couple of things. I think for most people, especially people that are health conscious, that go to the gym several times a week, that are working out, that kind of live that active lifestyle, they know what they're supposed to be doing, right? Like we all have a sense of like, okay, I know I'm supposed to eat more vegetables and fruit and fiber and protein and all of that good stuff. But the implementation of it can be challenging. And I think a lot of people get stuck in kind of that all or nothing thinking, where it's
Mm.
like, I'm going to, eat really clean for for the starting on Monday and, be 100% and do like 3 hours of meal prep on Sunday and like get ready for the week. And then it's just not sustainable and kind of falls apart. And then it's like the weekend is like this
Mm-hmm.
free for all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're like, just like, tired and like happy you made it to the weekend. And it's like, okay, I get to like order food and have wine. And it's just like, so it's that inconsistency, right? And that thinking, you know, it's great when you're in the all mentality where it's like you're all in and going 100%, but it's not sustainable. And so that inconsistency throughout the week and the month will lead to just not making any progress on your goals. Because if you're doing something 100%, 4 days of the week, and then you're not doing it at all 3 days of the week, that's actually a big chunk of the week that you're
Right.
not doing
Right.
anything,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So we really have to look at what's going to be consistent, what's going to be what's that gray area, right? Where it's like it's in between all or nothing, because
Mm-hmm.
that's where most of our life will actually happen. So what can we do in terms of like meal prep, right? Like, so what are little 5 minute, 10 minute things that we can do that will set us up for success during the week, right? What can we
Mm-hmm.
do, whether it's even just like cutting up some veggies in 10 minutes and putting them at eye level in the fridge, right? Like simple stuff that will like set you up for success. And that's really what we're looking at, is those strategies. So I would say the biggest mistake that people make is just the black and white thinking around it.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into kind of some of the other things around carbs and protein and stuff like that. But I think that mindset is the first thing that's, going to be a huge challenge to any kind of success.
Why do you think that is? Is it just the so many different types of messaging we get from society? Like, how did we get to this point where, like, you can be an elite athlete at a younger age and be so determined and so regimented with pretty much anything, right? In university, like your schedule, your fitness program, your nutrition, it's all very
Mm-hmm.
regimented. And then all of a sudden you turn the page and then it becomes like so much more open, and it's so much harder for us to balance that.
Yeah.
Like I always wonder, like, how do we get here where we struggle so much with nutrition in itself? I know there's obviously, when we say struggling, we're talking also all relative here, but
Mm-hmm.
um do you have any thoughts on like why it's such a challenge for most people?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's so many different factors that go into it. I think life gets really busy and like we have so many other things to prioritize often, that it's like, especially once you have, kids and careers and all of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff, where it's like, there are things that you like, things that you have to do, and you don't have all the time and energy necessarily to put into planning nutrition and meal prepping and all of that kind of stuff. But I think it is also that there's so much messaging out there around what we should and shouldn't do. And, a lot of the clients that I work with feel a lot of, like guilt and anxiety and stress around food. And
Mm-hmm.
so anytime those things come up, sometimes it's just like, I don't even want to think about this, right? Like, I don't even want to like put energy into this because it brings up so many negative emotions. So that can definitely be part of it too. And I think, our society is kind of hardwired to be like kind of that black and white thinking, where it's like this new diet plan or this new, whatever plan. And then we feel like we always have to be doing that thing versus, finding kind of like a personalized strategy that works for us and our family. Like that's ultimately what will bring you success in terms of nutrition.
Yeah, I can't agree more with that. I think it's like it's one of those things where it's like it takes so long to learn good nutrition practices and have a healthy relationship with food. Like it's crazy how it's such a vital part of our life.
Yeah.
and how many people actually just have a difficulty with just like the topic of nutrition or food. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening to this that just don't even want to listen to it because it's like
Yeah.
yet another person talking about nutrition, and right.
Totally.
And it's like it's pretty crazy. Like in my experience, like it's taken it's taken me a long time too. Like I've tried different things. I've done the sort of macro accounting, and that's sort of worked for me. But yeah, I would have to say even in my sort of fitness journey, like it took a few years to get to a sort of a quote unquote balanced
Yeah.
nutrition player where I don't have to feel guilty. I can eat, I can have a glass of wine or drink on the weekend for a little bit, or have this dessert here, but I don't feel like I can't do it, but I know that I shouldn't do too much of it so that I
Yeah.
have a balance, right?
Yeah. And I think it's about, I always talk to people about prioritizing nutrients versus restricting nutrients, right? Or
Hmm.
restricting foods. And, we can get more into that too. But I think anytime you have that restriction mindset, or again, kind of black and white thinking, I mean, it's human nature to want to rebel against that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
it just makes it harder. It's like this, this war going on internally around like, I don't want to have that, but I know I shouldn't, but I do want it, and that whole thing. So if we can instead look at it as like, in order to meet my goals, this is what I'm going to prioritize. And then, like you said, I can still have the dessert. I can still have the glass of wine. It's not going to make or break me. It's not like, oh, I have to just start from scratch on Monday. We know those things, if we're doing them once a week, once a month, whatever, it's not going to have a huge impact on our overall goals and diet and health, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that we're doing Friday, Saturday, and Sunday all day that are going to have the impact on our goals, right? So once you can make that shift and understand what nutrients and what foods you have to prioritize for what your goals are, then sometimes that can really make all the difference in terms of how you feel about food.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. Let's jump into that right now. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you, like, you're talking about prioritizing micronutrients? Like, how do you look at that sort of, like, how do you sort of, like you said, you help your thought process and how you sort of teach nutrition or talk about nutrition is very practical.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you sort of go about doing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a great question. So, oftentimes, and first of all, like, everyone again is different, right? So even when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about macronutrients, when we talk about calories, um, all of that is such an individualized thing. And so that's why when I work with clients, it's never like a one-time session, because we can't really make progress in one time of meeting you, because I can't tell you just based on height, weight, and age how much you should be eating, and macronutrients and stuff, because it's actually much more complex than that. So of course we have formulas and different guidelines and things to kind of help us decide, okay, as a starting point, let's try this. But then we look at other things as well, right? There are so many metrics that we can look at in terms of success, right? So it might be looking at changes in body composition, whether that's lean tissue or fat mass. It might be looking at recovery from workouts, sleep, energy levels, mood, blood work, even things like cravings and hunger throughout the day and those sorts of things, right? So there's so many different outcomes that we look at to see if you're eating the right amount for your body, because it's so different from person to person. Um, so it's hard to say like, yes, you need X amount of carbs and X amount of protein, but I really start by talking about, okay, depending on what your goals are, right? Like for the average
Mm-hmm.
person who probably wants to, get stronger and leaner,
Mm-hmm.
we might be looking at, okay, we want to prioritize things like protein, fiber, fruits and vegetables, that sort of thing. So for example, I was just working with a client this week. And so one of the concerns that he had was that, he was working out at lunch and then kind of feeling like grazing and snacking throughout the afternoon and evening, right? Super common. Like this happens to a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people. Um, and, he's reaching for granola bars, crackers, like the easy stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because those types of foods are convenient, like just rip open a package and dig in and you're good
Mm-hmm.
to go. Um, but again, and not that we want to say you can never have a granola bar, like that is, it's fine to have some granola bars, but is that going to be the best thing to eat for your goals, right? So if you're working out, he was having a good post-workout meal, But then we're looking at, okay, let's prioritize protein and fiber in the afternoon if you're feeling hungry, right? So we talked about what that might look like in terms of a snack in the afternoon. And then I always say, if you're still feeling hungry after that, have a granola bar, right? Like you
Right.
don't want to have that restriction mentality. So you can still have that. Most people, if they have a good, 15, 20 gram protein snack with some fiber in it, you're not going to necessarily feel hungry for something after that, right? But and sometimes just that mental feeling of like, okay, I still have the option of having the granola bar if I really want to, right? But it's kind of thinking through those things. The other thing too is looking at kind of hunger levels throughout the day, because that's such a key thing, right? And I always tell people, like what I often talk about with clients is that there are really like 4 types of hunger, or 4 reasons why we eat, right? One of them is like that physical hunger. One is kind of maybe for emotional reasons, whether we're tired or bored or upset or whatever it might be. One is out of habit, right? Like if we always have a snack while we're watching TV or whatever it is. And then the 4th one is because something tastes good, right? It's just like, oh, you just want to eat that chocolate or whatever it is. So if we can kind of, first of all, determine the reason why we're eating, that can be helpful to determine like strategies to help with that. But then also looking at hunger, like if we truly have a physiological hunger or craving, that can be a clue that maybe we're not eating enough earlier on in the day, right? So if someone tells me I always feel like grazing throughout the afternoon or in the evening, or I have cravings for food in the evening, that to me is actually more of a, let's figure out the physiological piece of that before we talk about like strategies for cravings, right? Because it could just be a matter of eating more at the beginning of the day and you start to feel satisfied later on in the day and you've kind of solved that problem, right? But I find a lot of times people are kind of scared to eat more during the day because they think they'll just end up eating all day long and still have that big snack in the evening. And they're worried about things like weight gain. So it can be helpful to have someone like myself kind of coach them through that and try different strategies for that. But it is, it can be a little bit nuanced in terms of like, okay, why am I actually having those cravings? Like, is it true hunger or is it something else? Or is it a habit I've developed? And, a lot of the work that I do is also like kind of just habit-based change where we're looking at practicing and developing new habits around food.
Things I learned, so I usually work out in the morning, and a lot of our community probably works in the morning, or at least the first part of the day.
Yeah.
And even like today is a good example. Like today I worked out at 5 a.m., which isn't always the case. I work out that early, but come 11 o'clock, I was really, really hungry. And I didn't think I ate enough at breakfast. And so as soon as I know that I'm a little bit hungry later in the day, I'm like, oh shoot, I didn't eat enough this morning. So, keep an eye on that for tomorrow. Make sure that I'm, getting a bit more around the workout, because I definitely feel that for sure. Being sort of an ectomorph and a really tall person and fairly lean.
Yeah.
I sort of undereat, I guess, in most cases, because I probably burn a lot. I got a high metabolism. And, so I noticed right away when in the afternoon I'm feeling hungry, and I'm like, shoot, I did not eat enough this morning.
Yeah, totally. And that's great to like, reflect on that and then make that change, right? Like that's what nutrition is I think sometimes people feel maybe guilty or feel like, oh, I'm hungry. Like I should just ignore that. Like I don't want to overeat. But if you can actually use that as data, right? And okay, I'm hungry. So what does that mean? Like hunger is a sign that your body is giving you that you need more calories. Like that's what hunger is. So if you keep ignoring that, you're actually ignoring your body's cue, and that in turn will have a cascade of effects in terms of metabolism slowing down, digestion slowing down, hormone production slowing down. So ignoring that, especially long term, is going to be really detrimental to anything you're trying to achieve. So instead of feeling like, oh, I have to ignore this hunger because I just had breakfast, thinking, okay, why am I hungry? Like maybe I didn't eat enough this morning. Tomorrow I'm going to eat more and see if I feel less hungry in the morning or less hungry at lunch. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Like that is a huge kind of feedback mechanism that our body gives us. And if we ignore that, that's where a lot of problems can come from.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's interesting how like your approach to nutrition is very specialized, and I love how you talk about blood work and all those different things, because like we're going back to what we were saying before, messaging is always like X amount of protein, X amount of carbs, X amount of fats, or and then they try to simplify it where saying it's a handful of protein and a fistful of X, and I imagine that works sort of to a general population. But I do think when we talk about sort of a corporate athlete that's been consistently joining or consistently going to the gym, maybe there's frustrations because they're not seeing the results, but they're they love the gym. That's their 1 hour a day where they can get their workout in, sweat, get strong. But then it's like the rest of the day is sort of obviously leading them not to get the results, right? So like what's in, like, let's talk about like sort of let's call it like workout nutrition, like pre, post. What's an easy way that you approach sort of nutrition around, the time of fitness? I know that endurance athletes is one thing, but like more from a quote unquote corporate athlete.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's a great question, because I think a lot of times the athletes that are going to the gym hour a day, 3, 4, 5 times a week, they don't necessarily think of themselves as athletes sometimes, right? Like they're like, well, I go to the gym, but I'll often get that, like someone will, want to work with me and say, but I'm not a real athlete. And to me, it's like, well, you're moving your body intentionally and you are working out. Like, to me, that is an athlete. So you want to fuel your body.
The majority of the population.
Exactly. So you want to fuel your body like an athlete, like change that mentality, right? Like, what do you want to get out of your body? Fuel your body for the work that it's doing. That is so, so important. And so, yes, it will look different than the endurance athlete who's on their bike for 3 hours and then running for an hour, right? Like, that's going to look different, but doesn't mean that we just ignore it altogether, right? And so a lot of kind of the more recreational athletes that I work with, they might get up early, do their workout before work because that's the only time they have and they enjoy that morning workout, but they may not eat anything before the workout, right? And like fasted workouts are a thing. They're a specific strategy that some athletes use in training for certain muscle adaptations, but it's not something that is generally a good idea, right? And especially for women. So women their hormones can really take a big hit from doing fasted workouts. And so I usually recommend, as a first thing, like, let's get something in before your workout. And it just helps to kind of balance out those stress hormones first thing in the morning, because when you work out, especially like a high intensity or heavy lifting, like that is stress to the body, right? And so when we wake up in the morning, our body is already kind of in that like, high stress, like some of those stress hormones are a little bit higher. So we want to give our body a little bit of something so that we're not just like piling more and more stress on it, right? Like that's, so having a small snack before a workout can be helpful. And it can actually help with increasing lean tissue as well. So it can be, it can be something really small, like a piece of fruit or something like that. It can be like some branched chain amino acids. Those can be helpful if you're doing like a fasted workout, to have those before or during the workout. So it doesn't have to be anything big, but it does have to be something, especially for female athletes, because oftentimes that's where we start to see shifts in hormones, which can then kind of translate into changes in metabolism, increased cravings, appetite is not being regulated, all of those sorts of things. So that would be kind of pre-workout. And then post-workout, same thing.
For pre-workout, to keep it simple, do you care so much as like if it's mainly fats, proteins, or carbs? Or
so I would say, ideally, kind of you want to think about it as like ideally you want a little bit of carb and a little bit of protein. But again, something is better than nothing, right? Because I know if you're working out at 5 a.m, you probably don't feel like having something big, right? Like you're not getting up at 4 a.m. to like have your pre-workout meal, and you don't need to, right? So that's where having something like a little bit of protein powder mixed in with some water and a banana, could be a great, just like kind of quick thing before you do your workout in the morning. Sometimes liquid is easier to tolerate than solid if you're about to do a more like high intensity type of workout. So that's why something like a mix, like a protein powder, or it doesn't have to be a full scoop. It can be half a scoop, right, mixed in with some liquid can be helpful.
Okay. And would you suggest, if you were working out for an hour, whether it was a high intensity workout or a CrossFit workout or a strength workout for the corporate athlete, would you recommend any sort of intra workout fuel?
Mm-hmm. So not necessarily. So, water is fine for an hour workout. If you are like, let's say, again, like if you're doing like more of a fasted workout, if you don't have time to grab anything beforehand, then adding some BCAAs to your water could be a helpful thing to add in there to have during the workout. So that would be one thing that could potentially be helpful.
Okay, gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny how you're saying fasted workout, because I feel like most people probably aren't even looking at, like, they're actually literally wanting to do fasted workouts. I feel like it's more like a convenient thing where they just wake up, go to the gym.
Totally.
And they're like, oh, I'm not doing a fasted workout. I'm just working out.
Exactly. And that's the thing, right? It's like, again, like if you're more of a recreational athlete, you're like, well, what's the big deal? I'm waking up and going to do my workout. Like, it's not a big deal. But you have to give your body what it needs, right? And if you're doing that 3 to 5 times a week, like that can start to have some serious impacts on body composition and metabolism and all of those sorts of things. So if you do, like some people find they can't eat, like they just can't, they don't feel hungry or they don't want to eat something before workout. So start small, right? Start with something like I said, maybe liquid or something really small, and just get your body used to it. But it will make a big difference. It does. Mm-hmm.
No, for sure. And I know that there's a lot of conversations about like high glycemic, like sugar-based, or some sort of, a lot of the recovery drinks have some sort of dextrose or glucose or whatever. And I know that endurance athletes have that. When it comes to, like, is it, I don't want to necessarily sponsor the idea, but like that sort of high sugar-based sort of snack before or after, is that something that is okay from your eyes? Mm-hmm. Or does it lead into bad sort of things in the end?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think it is okay for sure. And I know a lot of the recovery, like some of the recovery blends will have like kind of more of that kind of a glucose type of sugar, as well as the protein. I think for the athlete that's working out for an hour, 3 to 5 times a week, you don't necessarily have to have that. It's different with endurance athletes, you're always kind of working to kind of recover those glycogen stores, right? Because glycogen is always being depleted. So glycogen is carbohydrate stores in the liver and muscle. And so that's where you want those high glycemic carbs to kind of like, that's a really quick way to refuel and top up the glycogen stores again for your next workout. Whereas for the athlete that's working out for an hour, 3 to 5 times a week, you actually, in that hour, are you depleting your glycogen stores? Maybe, right? But you actually have 24 hours at least until your next workout to get those refueled, right? So it's not as critical to have like high glycemic index right after the workout. But that being said, having some carbohydrate can be helpful because it can help with muscle recovery and just recovery in general. So I think it is, important to have a source of carbohydrate with a good, 30 grams at least of protein, I would say for most people, after the workout to start that muscle recovery. But so I guess to your question, it's not like it has to be the high glycemic stuff. If you have a recovery blend that has, some glucose in it or has some form of high glycemic index sugar and has some protein, it's not going to make or break anything. Like you're not going to get diabetes from that, right? But you could also have some oatmeal with a scoop of protein powder in it.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then from a timing perspective, you're working out from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., finish at 7 a.m. Is there this sort of anabolic window? Is this a thing? Is it like, is it immediate? Is it like a half hour, an hour later? Like what is, like, I know there's obviously people will say, well, I gotta get in the shower, gotta get on the road, and I'm going to work or something like that, or I
Yeah.
pick up the kids. So like, what is your sort of prescription or thoughts on how to best time the sort of post-workout food meal?
Yeah, so there's not really as much of an anabolic window as we once thought. Like we used to be like 15 minutes after, like you must have something, right? And more recent research has really shown that it's like a 24-hour kind of thing afterwards. What's most important is that you're having, you know, kind of good, you know, good hits of protein throughout that 24-hour period, you know, ideally every 3 to 4 hours. And that will really optimize muscle recovery. But again, to keep things kind of maybe more straightforward, I usually tell people have your recovery meal or snack within 30 to 60 minutes of finishing your workout. Because yeah, there's not that window, but you're right. Like once you, okay, now I'm done my workout, I go home, I shower, I get the kids ready, I get ready for work, I leave. Like it could be 2 hours, right? Like you're just missing, you know, you're missing a window of opportunity to get refueling, right? Like the sooner the better, because then you're going to have more opportunities to refuel. So if you can get something in within 30 to 60 minutes that has that, you know, I recommend, depending on the person, anywhere from 20 to 40 grams of protein, and then a little, you know, some carbohydrate. It doesn't have to be a full breakfast meal, but it can be something quick. And then you could have your breakfast once you get to work or whatever it is. But just to kind of start that process as soon as possible, especially, you know, as athletes get a little bit older in their 40s and 50s, muscle recovery is huge, right? Like that is, protein is so important. So if you can start that refueling process as soon as possible, like that's just going to be of benefit.
Okay. Makes sense. Maybe this might be fun. Maybe you can, I'll toss out my workout routine and you can grade me or give me tips.
Okay.
So let's take today, for example, 5 a.m. workout. I take a little bit of BioSteel sort of high performance sports drink to drink during the workout. And then I also bring a scoop of vegan sort of protein powder. And that's what I sort of drink throughout the workout / end of the workout. And then I had I think it was 4 dates this morning when I woke up. I had 4 dates. Today was a sort of a high intensity sort of aerobic sort of sweaty workout for an hour. And then after that, finished the protein shake. So I did about an hour and 20 minutes of work. And then I came home, had, let's say 2 eggs and a bunch of egg whites mixed with some peppers and mushrooms, some green juice, which is just like a home remedy of spinach in a blender, with some apple cider vinegar, and then a scoop and a half of oatmeal with a little bit of natural peanut butter, chia seeds, flax seeds, fruit, and a little maple syrup on top.
Okay.
I eat a lot of food, probably more than most people do.
No, that's great.
But am I ticking the boxes? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no, totally. I was writing things down here so I could get okay. So yeah, definitely. So that's a great example. So 4 dates beforehand. Okay. Good carbs, right? Before the workout, which is what we want. And dates are a great example because it's quick, right? Wake up, have your dates, get out the door. Then you had your protein during, which is great. Like a protein powder. Some people might find that it's a little heavy during a workout, but it's very individualized, right? And so you are definitely getting a good source of protein there. An hour and 20-minute workout. Then afterwards, you had the eggs with the egg whites, which I love because you want to get the protein from the eggs. The egg yolk does have a lot of good important nutrients, but to get enough protein, you're not going to have 6 eggs, right? So then adding the egg whites can be helpful. The green juice, the oatmeal for the carbs, seeds, which is a great source of fiber and lots of different micronutrients, fruit, peanut butter. Yeah, you're ticking all the boxes.
I've always wondered, I've had this conversation with Michelle and a few other people about how much fat that I intake because of the peanut butter, because of the chia seeds, the flax seeds, and the eggs.
Yeah.
it seems like maybe a little bit too much fat. And so there was a time period where I didn't put the peanut butter in reluctantly,
Yeah.
but it's made its way back in because I'm like, no, it just tastes so much better.
Yeah, totally. And this is where, again, you have to kind of figure out what's going to work best for you, right? Because, and the other thing too is fat helps with satiety too. So you might take the peanut butter out and be like, oh, now I'm actually hungrier like an hour later, right? So you have to kind of figure out what will work best for you. But yeah, with a lot of the endurance athletes I work with, because for a lot of the season, carbohydrates are the priority, and so sometimes fat can compete with that when they're adding things like a lot of peanut butter and seeds and stuff like that. So in those cases, we often have to, like I always say, prioritize carbs, right? So if your carb intake is too low and your fat intake is too high, then we maybe have to shift that by taking out the peanut butter and adding some extra oats or fruit or something like that, right? So sometimes we will do those shifts in kind of macronutrient balance. But yeah, it's, fat is one of those things that some people do a bit better with a higher, slightly higher fat intake. And we certainly don't want to go too low in fat because we know that has all kinds of negative repercussions in terms of hormone health and stuff like that. So it's that balance, and everyone's different. Some people do well with a higher carb diet and some people do well with a lower carb diet. So you have to look at kind of all the different pieces of, all those different outcomes that I looked at to figure out what's going to be best.
That makes sense. And so, yeah, that all happened before, like, let's say 7:30ish. Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So then on a rest day, when I wake up, let's say, maybe I wake up at 6:30 or something like that. Am I approaching, that seems like a lot of food. Mm-hmm. Should I, do the 2 eggs with a bunch of egg whites and then have that nice heaping amazing bowl of oatmeal with fruit and maple syrup and peanut butter and seeds? Or should I be sort of thinking about it in a slightly different way?
So, I always say on rest days, your intake usually goes down a bit because you're not doing pre, during, or post workout nutrition, sure. Right? Mm-hmm. And so naturally that part is cut out anyway. So then if you kind of follow your usual meals and snacks throughout the day and adjusting based on hunger and fullness levels and things like that, usually you're kind of hitting the right spot for how much you should be eating. Now, sometimes on recovery days, we might actually feel a bit hungrier because after a harder workout, sometimes our appetite is a bit suppressed. So we don't feel as hungry. And then the next day, it's almost like trying to catch up, right? So we might feel like, oh, why am I really hungry today? I didn't work out today. But it could be a bit of catch up from the day before. And so you want to, again, pay attention to that. Your body's saying it needs some extra nutrients for recovery. So then maybe adding a bit more protein to your meals could be helpful in that case. But yeah, I would say, if that meal is still, you feel satisfied after that, you don't feel like it's too much, you're not too full, then that would be fine for a rest day because you're not having the dates, the scoop of protein powder during the workout. You're not having some of those other things. So naturally that kind of decreases. And then, focusing more on, the high fiber and the, lots of color, like lots of fruits and vegetables and things like that on rest days can be helpful. And like the protein piece too for recovery. Kind of prioritizing those things and kind of assessing how you feel with that amount of food.
Makes sense. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So, like, I guess the topic of protein, I know that it's often, I'm sure in your experience, it's a pretty big topic. I know that especially with women, actually, no, I guess it's not fair. Like protein and carbs probably have the same sort of rap.
Yeah.
Because like oftentimes, right, everyone thinks carbs will make them fat or fat will make them fat and protein will make them like bulky.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know that I would assume, and maybe this is a question for you, like, are we I guess we're a very carb heavy society and very low protein?
Yeah. I mean, we are and we're not. Like, so with carbs, it's kind of this funny thing. Like, some people are very scared of carbs and want to avoid them at all costs. But then most of, like I mentioned, the granola bar and the cracker example, right? Most of our convenience, like quick foods, are very high carb, refined types of foods. So it's kind of this like, love-hate relationship where like, yeah, we do eat a lot of them, but also we don't like them and we try to avoid them, right? So, so it's finding, and, you know, just like no one nutrient will make you gain weight, right? Like it's looking at the balance and, you know, the excess of everything. So, so it's not fair to say like, oh yeah, carbohydrates will make you gain weight. Like that's just not true. And the same is true with protein. Like if you eat too much protein, you'll gain weight too, right? Like you have to look at like the whole picture of the diet. And so with carbs, yeah, there's this weird relationship with carbs. And then with protein, also kind of like, you know, most people actually eat enough protein, but it kind of depends on their needs, but it's also the distribution of protein throughout the day, right? And so we know, especially if we're looking at making body composition changes, having, you know, especially, you know, kind of for older 30 plus type of athletes, we want to get about 0.4 to 0.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, you know, every 3 to 5 hours. Like if we can get that amount 4 to 5 times per day, that's kind of the goal, right? And I can't maybe do the math right off the top of my head, but that might be 30 to 40 grams for, you know, depending on your weight, obviously, 30 to 40 grams of protein 4 or 5 times a day. So are most people doing that? No, right? Like oftentimes breakfast is very low in protein, snacks are low in protein, lunch may be low in protein, dinner is probably too high in protein, right? So it's this imbalance. So if we can kind of figure out how to balance it out better and get kind of that distribution of protein throughout the day, carbohydrates, figure out how to have a good, healthy relationship with carbohydrates where you know kind of the timing of when to take them, what types of carbohydrates to have, you know, all of those sorts of things. Like carbohydrates, you can almost think of them as like protein sparing, right? If our body has enough carbohydrate to do all of the activities we're doing, then our body's not going to have to kind of go into the protein and the muscle stores and break down muscle for energy. So carbohydrates actually play a really important role. And especially in women, if we're under eating carbohydrates, again, that can have huge implications for hormones and estrogen levels and things like that. So it is actually quite important to get the right amount of carbohydrates. And again, oftentimes people will have this all or nothing where they're like low carb, like I'm not going to eat any carbs, like no carbs with my meals, right? But then there's this bounce back where it's like all the carbs all the time, right? It's just like, so it's finding that balance and like, how can I eat enough of the things I need so that I feel good and I'm not having these cravings or these big swings up and down in terms of, you know, hunger levels and things like that.
I have so many questions that just came out of that. First question, actually, just first thought, like, how do you balance, you know, your macros? Like, maybe this is all the same question, but protein. So, like, I feel like it's fairly common for folks to say, like, if they have a built-in routine for a snack in the afternoon, it's very difficult for me to get protein. Mm-hmm. I've tried the Greek yogurt, I've tried the protein shake, I've tried the boiled egg. Mm-hmm. What else can I do for protein, right? Like, it feels like we don't have enough options, convenient options for protein in the, like, for those instances. Like, would you, like, do you have any sort of ideas? Because then it's like, okay, we'll go grab a protein bar, but then how do you balance whole foods versus what is in this protein bar? It's got a bunch of chemicals in it, probably. It tells me I get 25 grams of protein, but what's the source? Like, how do you approach that? Because I feel like that's, like, even for someone like myself, I feel like I've sort of nailed the whole nutrition thing, but that's still something that you easily struggle with.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, that's one of the big things is like how to get that amount of protein in kind of quick, convenient snack options that aren't like eating a chicken breast meal kind of thing. So yeah, exactly. And you could do that. You could certainly do that. I've done it before. But yeah, you want it to be kind of like, a bit normal too, right? Like you don't want to be like in this like bodybuilding, like any chicken and broccoli 5 times a day, right? Like you want it to be like enjoyable and like, kind of eating foods that you want to keep eating. So yeah, I mean, definitely the options you mentioned are great. The Greek or Icelandic yogurt, the hard-boiled eggs, having a little protein shake. Those are all great options. Sometimes it can be, and even to protein bars, like, yeah, for sure you can have some, like, I don't usually recommend having protein bars every day because you're right. Like sometimes even it can just make people feel like GI wise, not that great because of some of the like sugar alcohols they put in there and like different sweeteners and stuff like that. So they're okay as kind of like a backup, but not necessarily your daily go-to. So looking at, like even like looking at some plant-based protein options, right? So things like nuts and seeds, where you may not get 20 grams of protein from a serving of pumpkin seeds, but you might get 10 grams, right? So if you pair that with, a couple slices of cheese and an apple, you're getting a decent amount of protein, right? Or things like they have different like roasted fava beans and roasted lentils and things like that, where you can actually get 10, 15 grams of protein in a serving. And again, you could pair that with something else and get, a pretty decent protein, high protein snack. And then there's things like cottage cheese and, even just like drinking something like kefir that has 10 grams of protein in a cup, which is like it's like a fermented milk drink, right? So those sorts of things can be good options too for getting extra protein in. But yeah, oftentimes, or, you could even do something like, I know people are going to be like, what? But like a slice of like a whole grain bread, which has, maybe 5 or 6 grams of protein in one slice, and add, a bit of like almond butter and hemp seeds on top, right? Like that could easily be 12 grams of protein right there. And then if you have a little cup of kefir with that, like that could be 20 grams, 25 grams of protein, right? So you kind of have to think about mixing and matching sometimes too, and getting a little bit creative. And there's definitely a lot of snacks that can give you that protein hit.
No, that's great. I mean, that's great advice. I think when I hear you say that, it's like, I guess going back to what you're saying though, you have to sort of figure out a prioritization. If you're prioritizing protein, then the extra fat that comes with some of those snacks is what it is. Again, it's not going to make you add additional weight in any way, because maybe, okay, cool.
Yeah, exactly.
I see that as like kind of like, I would imagine that was fairly high in fat, but I guess that's also just kind of comes with the territory if you need to get protein.
Yeah, totally. And so sometimes, again, like, and this is where individualizing it based on your needs is going to be so important, right? Because for some people, that might be a bit too much fat, and we might look at some other options. Right. But for most people, it can be a reasonable amount of fat that won't be detrimental in terms of their overall goals.
Right. Cool. The other question that I sort of took note of, carbohydrates late in the day, or I guess late in the day or so how I approach it is I try to decrease my carbs as I go throughout the day. So breakfast / workout time is heavy carbs, lunch has got a bunch of carbs, and then when I get to dinner, carbs are fairly small to some degree. Obviously, if I'm going out for dinner, most likely probably not, because a burger and fries is X, but like for the most part, that's sort of my golden rule. Would you say that's appropriate, or do you relate it back to like opposite your workout time, or do you not just as long as you're in balanced carbs, it's not a big deal?
Yeah, I mean, I do like that approach because you're prioritizing carbohydrates around your workout time. And oftentimes just metabolically, like we're more active in the beginning of the day versus the end of the day, right? So it does make sense to kind of eat in a way that supports that. So kind of front loading your carbohydrates, especially if the workout is in the morning, does make a lot of sense. And then kind of tapering it off throughout the day to the end of the day. I always tell people, like, again, if you're getting to dinner and you're like really hungry and feeling like you have to eat a lot, that's a big red flag that you're not eating enough during the day. And oftentimes, if we're under eating at the beginning of the day, especially if we work out, we're going to feel like they've actually measured and looked at, hunger hormones and things like that. those are going to be elevated later on in the day. So you're going to feel that in the evening. And so if you feel like you have to sit down to a big, heavy dinner and like that's what you're hungry for, it would just be, a point of reflection where you want to say, okay, maybe I actually need to be moving the carbs to the beginning of the day. And then you want to get to dinner and feel satisfied with, at least kind of the same amount that you would eat at the other meals, or maybe a bit smaller, and feel okay with that. When you get to that point, that's kind of a good sign that, okay, I'm probably eating enough for what I need during the day. And again, I think sometimes people feel like, oh, I have to, be good. And I'm using quotations, right? Be good and not eat carbs at the beginning of the day. And I'm only going to eat, protein and veg and all of that stuff. And then they get to the end of the day and they're like hungry and wanting to have a larger meal. And so let's flip that, right? Like, let's work with our bodies, not against our bodies. And so let's feed our body the energy and the carbohydrates it needs at the beginning of the day, and then see how we feel at the end of the day.
Makes sense. And even for someone that works out later in the day, obviously the rule for still getting carbohydrates around your workout is still
totally
the priority.
Yeah, definitely. So you want to prioritize around the workout. You want to still have a recovery carb protein snack afterwards, or have your dinner afterwards. Like I would say, yeah, definitely you don't want to, like, if you do a workout later in the day or even in the evening, you wouldn't want to just skip a recovery meal or snack, right, because you're worried about eating in the evening. Like that recovery, I would say, is prioritize that over, oh, I don't want to eat in the evening, because there's just nothing to support that, like, you shouldn't eat in the evening, especially if you just did a workout. So that's going to be important. Yeah.
Gotcha. And I guess, how do you approach someone that is, they're looking to, body composition is their goal, they're looking to lose some weight, and right away their thought process is, I need to cut the calories, I need to, like you said, carb free, or I'm just whatever. And, they have this goal in mind that in 12 weeks, I need to do this. Mm-hmm. How do you help them approach this?
Yeah.
Or approach their goal?
So that's a really great question. So when I work with clients, and I'm very upfront about this, right, when we first talk, before we even decide to work together, I always say, weight is something, like weight alone, I think body composition is a better marker of, making changes and stuff. Weight alone is a difficult thing, because there's so many things affecting our weight, right? Whereas body composition, is a little bit more, goes a little bit more in depth in terms of what's happening, right? So, but I always say, obviously there's so many factors playing a role. And so, I want to help people find kind of their best weight or their best body composition for them, right? And that's, again, going to be different for everyone. And it is more of a long-term goal, I would say. Sure, you can see changes in the short term in, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, that sort of thing. But just like an endurance sport, like it often takes years and like, not to discourage people, but like it's something that you work away on. And like, I always say, like, I want you to, like, 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road, look back and say, like, whoa, like I've actually come a really long way, right? Like if we can make those steps and lay that foundation, then that's really where the success lies. So, so I always tell people, like, yes, like, let's make these changes. I want you to, like, first of all, feel good, perform really well, see, achieve your fitness goals. And then changes in body composition are almost like a byproduct of that, right? Because if we're feeling good, we're doing all the things. So when we look at cutting back on calories, that is often the go-to, right? Like, I'm going to cut back on what I'm eating, calories, carbs, and I'm going to see some weight loss. And sure, in the short term, we often do see weight loss as a result of that, right? But of course, we want to look at what kind of weight are you losing, because that's really important, right? Are you losing muscle? Are you losing fat? Are you losing water? And we also want to look at what is that doing long term, right? Because we know even a few days of a restricted diet can lead to decreases in our basal metabolic rate.
So our metabolism starts to slow down because our body is trying to conserve energy. Hormone production starts to decrease. We, often see some reduction in muscle mass. So even though the number on the scale may be shifting, you're also doing damage that can be difficult to reverse, right? So sometimes it's a matter of, and I'll often see this with people that feel like they're kind of stuck, right? So they're like, I'm working out really hard. I'm watching my diet. Like, why am I not seeing changes? Or maybe they're seeing the opposite changes of what they want. Like, I'm actually gaining fat and losing muscle, right? And it could be that you're actually not eating the right amount for what your body needs. So it started slowing down. And so sometimes, that's where we might look at, okay, nutrient timing and eating enough so that our metabolism can work well. And then, that's where we often start to see things moving a bit better and shifting so that you're building muscle, decreasing body fat. And that's really where, like, once you find that and you can start working on that, then that's where you start to see the progress coming a lot faster.
Okay. That makes sense. And so what's a good nutrition tip for someone that wants to build sort of lean muscle mass? I mean, same category sort of, but they're prioritizing, I want to get more muscle, which equals I'm getting stronger. Or...
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, the main thing is looking at, obviously protein is huge when we're looking at increasing muscle mass and getting kind of that, those chunks of protein often throughout the day. Having there's a lot of research that shows pre-bedtime protein of about 40 grams is really helpful in muscle recovery overnight. So that can be helpful.
Is that specific to a casein protein?
So the research has used casein protein, and casein is dairy protein. So I usually recommend, based on what we know from the research, having some kind of dairy protein, using that, having that so that could be something like a Greek yogurt or Icelandic yogurt or something like that. Doesn't necessarily have to be casein protein powder. But yeah, that can be an effective strategy. Sleep. I mean, if we don't get enough sleep, then that's like foundational, right? And so we have to look at all of these different components. And that's true for any changes in terms of body composition and health and stuff like that, is that if we're putting all this work into nutrition, but not prioritizing sleep, like, it's not going to work, right? Like, that's number one, if we can prioritize that. So that's a huge piece of it too. It depends what your goal is. Like, if it's actual like weight gain in terms of increasing muscle mass, then obviously you want to have that calorie surplus, and you have to do that consistently. So again, it's like, you can't do it 50% of the time and expect to see, the results you want. You have to do it, 80, 90, 95% of the time. So you have to find a way that works. And a lot of times when people are wanting to increase muscle mass, they maybe don't do it in there's no planned approach, just like many things with nutrition, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to try to make the best choice. I'm going to try to eat more protein, but let's actually have a plan for how that's going to work. And then you can actually be successful in doing it 90% of the time, right? Instead of just trying to eat more protein or more protein bars or having more protein shakes or whatever it might be.
Gotcha. And going back to what we were talking about before with sort of the, what feels like a limited sort of ideas for protein. Is it important to diversify sort of what you're doing for protein? Like, if I'm having eggs in the morning and I'm doing chicken at lunch, and I had a protein shake in the morning with my workout, and then I have a protein shake again in the afternoon, and then I have chicken again at night. Like, is that, now I'm getting my protein in, but I'm getting it from really just two sources. Is that something that you sort of look at, or again, it just comes down to sort of fine tuning over time?
Yeah, I mean, diversity is always a good thing in your diet, because there's so many different nutrients that work synergistically in the foods that we consume. So always having the same sources isn't, in the long run, is not going to be beneficial. But, definitely, focusing on those high quality proteins. So if you're having eggs and chicken and, whey protein or a good like plant-based protein, then you are getting, a good amount of the different essential amino acids and high quality proteins. So that's good. I would say, I would look at, are you doing this short term? So some of the athletes I work with will say like, okay, the next 3 months, I want to gain, X amount of muscle. And like, so, okay, short term, sure, let's increase, so you're having 2 protein shakes a day and you're eating more chicken and you're doing that kind of thing for the short term. But then longer term, we modify things a bit so there's more variety. But sometimes if you have a goal and we're looking at, okay, we're going to eat, you need to eat 200 grams of protein a day. Well, what does that look like then? How can we realistically do it? You're going to probably need more protein powder in your diet and more of those like concentrated sources of protein. So sometimes we'll do that for the short term, but longer term, it will be better to have a bit more diversity just because different types of foods have different protein profiles and you're getting different benefits from them.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's great. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's really generic and simple. Maybe simplifying it too much, but we've talked a lot about the details and we've talked a lot about nutrition. I'm someone that's been doing regular sort of 3 to 5. I'm a regular sort of weekend warrior. My fitness regimen is pretty sound. I don't skip a workout, and I've been doing it for a year or so, but my nutrition is still something that just, I can't get down. Mm-hmm. What is sort of a few things that you would just tell that person to focus on
mm-hmm.
to a very simple aspect of just like getting just a little bit better, just like a starting point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. How to simplify it to that level? Yeah, I would say.
We talked a lot about it, and I think at like this point, it's like, someone's listening is like, oh my God, there's so many things to think about, like time and diversity. And it is a complicated topic. I totally get it. It's not as easy as some people make it sound like, but I also know it can be easy. If you can simplify it. But I know it's not an easy answer.
I would say as a starting point, if you can look at like even just like meal timing and snack timing. So prioritize pre and post workout nutrition, and then eating, every 3 to 5 hours kind of throughout the day. So that might look like pre and post and lunch and dinner. It might look like pre and post lunch, snack, dinner, but if you can get kind of that consistency as a like number one starting point, that alone will be huge for someone who might skip meals, or for someone who's like not taking in anything before or after the workout, or goes long periods without eating, like, and has lots of inconsistency. So if you can get consistent just with that, I think that would be a huge starting point before even looking at meal composition or anything like that. That can be, I would say that would be number one.
That's great. And then, so someone that is interested in sort of taking the nutrition further, how could someone how do they start working with someone like yourself? Like, I know that a lot of people, like, they digest a lot of nutritional advice off the internet, podcasts, etc. But not many people, like, they have a fitness coach. They don't always have a nutrition coach. And I know I would almost assume, no offense, but like a nutrition coach would be your bang for your buck is probably in that area versus just a fitness coach. I mean, I don't know fitness coaches, but I mean, it's 1 hour a day versus sort of, 23 hours of the day or 24 hours a day. So how would someone start working with someone like yourself?
Yeah. So we have different options for how to work with us. We work one-on-one with people, and we have, different programs that we work with. So we have like a 6-week program and a 3-month program that we work with athletes in. And so to get started with us, you could go to our website, which is blueprintnutrition.ca. There is a link there to book a call. So we always book an initial call where we just kind of jump on a call and discuss what your goals are and see if we're a good fit to work together, because that's so important too. You want to make sure that you're working with someone that you want to work with in terms of just like any kind of coach, but nutrition coaching as well. And then from there, we would decide kind of what the next best steps are. So there's a link to book that call on our website at blueprintnutrition.ca. And yeah, that would probably be the best way to get in touch with us and to kind of start the process of working with us. And yeah, I mean, I think, my goal when I work with people is always to give them the tools, strategies, and all of the information they need to go forward and feel confident doing it on their own, right? So I don't want people to have to see me every week for the rest of their lives. I want them to feel empowered and confident and feel like they have a really solid plan moving forward. So that's what I always tell people. Of course, I would, love to continue working with people if they really feel they need that support and accountability. But I really want to, just empower people to do it on their own and feel like they know what they're doing. Because I think, there's so much information out there. It's confusing, it's overwhelming, it's stressful. So to have that plan and guidance and accountability to kind of develop something for you, your specific needs and very personalized needs, I think that feels good. That feels like, okay, I can kind of ignore all of the noise that's out there because I know what I need for my body. And that's my hope and my goal for all of my clients.
Great. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. I'll definitely probably take you up on that. I would love to keep talking to you. Hopefully we can get you back, because I know that we wanted to talk about nutrition with kids and teenagers.
Yeah,
we'll
for
get to
sure.
That. So we'll definitely have to schedule you in for another session.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the information. This has been super great. And thanks everyone for listening. Hopefully you learned a few things. And definitely reach out and book a session.
Thank you.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.